European Englishness in the text. And native life, native food, right? Native song, native celebration and victory, right? The howling, right? The demonic, like singing and dancing, right? Their food, their villages, this nation that they're moving through is all rendered as foreign, right? Unfamiliar, savage, right? When Brooks wants to remind us, the opposite is what is true, right? It is the English who are really foreign to this land. It is the English who have no idea where anything is, what's edible and what's not edible, right? This place that they're claiming as their own, they know so little about. But if you read something like Rowlandson, you begin to you see native peoples as foreigners in their own homelands, and the English people, right, as what is not as what is supposed to be here, right? She says it's really uncomfortable for native readers, right, to engage with this. You see it so clearly, right? She's not kept in a prison. She's not tied up. She just doesn't know where she is. And has no idea how to get home. Right? It's a different kind of captivity. This is what she means by a full cast of characters. Right? She wants to see the Wampanoag. She wants to see Metacom, right? Wiedemoon, who is her mistress, right? James Printer is somebody who actually helps negotiate Rowlandson's release, but also the man who set the typeset for the first edition of this, right? A native man, native Christian man, right, who does negotiations between these communities, but who also was a printer, right, and helped print her original text, right, in the shop. This is what Brooks is trying to do, right, is to create what is vague and unclear in this book to render it as clearer, right? Instead of, oh, we move vaguely up and down. She's like, oh, I want to build a map, right? I'll build a map that shows people where she went. We'll go visit those places and document them so you can see them. They're not vague, right? This is old Wampanoag territory, old Wampanoag settlements. People lived here, they raised their families here, they buried their dead here, they celebrated here. The eighth remove. They're on their way to meet King Philip. Right? They're coming back to the kind of central place, kind of central territories of the Wampanoag, right? Where King Philip is. 279, 15 lines down, quoting some scripture. She says this, and this is the place where I talk about, the cover of this, right? The cover. Written by her own hand for her private use. Right? That's what the text tells us. She says, and here I may take occasion to mention one principal ground of my setting forth these lines. Even as the psalmist says, to declare the works of the Lord and his wonderful power in carrying us along, preserving us in the wilderness, while under the enemy's hand and returning of us in safety again. There's other places where she talks. Here's why I'm doing this, right? This one tracks with this, right? To recollect God's treatment of her, right? God's mercy in delivering her. How did God deal with us, right? What did we learn? She cries for the first time on 279. Then my heart began to fail, and I fell a weeping. It was the first time in my remembrance that I wept before them. Although I had met with so much affliction, and my heart was many times ready to break, yet could I not shed one tear in their sight. For there had been all this while and amazed, like one astonished. Right? She's in shock. Right? She's lost a 6-year-old. The whole house got destroyed. She has no idea where she is. She saw the English army coming to deliver her, and they couldn't cross a river. She just watched a bunch of old men and women cross. Right? And she breaks down. Then I went to see King Philip. He bade me come in and sit down and asked me whether I would smoke it. A usual compliment nowadays among saints and sinners, but this is no way suited me. For though I had formerly used tobacco, yet I had left it ever since I was first taken. It seems to be a bait the devil lays to make men lose their precious time. I remember with shame how formerly when I had taken 2 or 3 pipes, I was presently ready for another. Such a bewitching thing it is. But I thank God he has now given me power over it. And surely there are many maybe better employed at the last 7 minutes to some tobacco. She has a chance to meet King Philip. Ninth remove, bottom of the page, last sentence. This was about the time that their great captain, Nanto, was killed in the Narragansett country. My son being now about a mile from me, I asked liberty to go and see him. Right? Her son's a mile away. She knows about this. She asked if she could go see him, and they said, fine. And away I went, but quickly lost myself, traveling over hills and through swamps, and could not find the way to him. And I cannot but admire at the wonderful power and goodness of God to me, in that, though I was gone from home, and met with all sorts of Indians, and those I had no knowledge of, and there being no Christian soul near me, yet not one of them offered the least imaginable miscarriage to me. Somebody walk this out a little bit.
She goes into the woods, gets lost, meets a bunch of different people, and also all of them treat her badly.
Yeah. Why is she shocked about this?
Because she sees them as like savages and unintelligent people.
Yeah. She doesn't make sense to her all the way. Right? No one's tried to harm her. Right? No one tried to hurt her. Right? She expects something different. One bitter cold day, I could find no room to sit before the fire. I went out and could not tell what to do, but I went to another wigwam where they were also sitting around the fire. But the woman laid a skin for me, and bid me sit down, gave me some ground nuts, and bade me come again, and told me they would buy me if they were able to. But these were strangers to me, and I never saw them before. Hospitality. Welcome. You get it from everybody. Right? Some folks are real rude. Some folks are real mean. Right? But she does encounter goodness in this place. She encounters sympathy, kindness, and understanding. Right? She meets the king. Right? Who later on will say, like, you're going to get home. Don't worry about it. Like, no one's going to kill you. You're going to be okay. Right? You're going to be fine. He's basically protecting all of us. So no. 12th remove. She has moments of defiance on 284. Somebody tells her to do something and she doesn't want to do it. They threaten her. She decides she's going to do it. 14th remove. She kind of doubles back on something that she said earlier. She talks about earlier about how she hadn't had anything to eat in a week, right? She couldn't keep down the trash until she was 3 weeks in, and then she decides she's going to start eating food again. She kind of doubles back on this. It tells us again about earlier on something she hadn't told us before. Now we must pack up and be gone from the thicket. This is the 14th remove on 286. Bending our course toward the bay because of the bay town. I have nothing to eat by the way this day, but a few crumbs of cake that an Indian gave my girl the same day we were taken. She gave it to me and I put it in my pocket. There it lay till it was so moldy for want of good baking that one could not tell what it was made of. It fell all the crumbs and grew so dry and hard it was like little flints, and this refreshed me many times when I was ready to faint. It was in my thoughts, when I put it into my mouth, that if I ever returned, I would tell the world what a blessing the Lord gave to such mean food. As we went along, they killed a deer, with the young one in her. They gave me a piece of the fawn. It was so young and tender that one might eat the bones as well as the flesh, and yet I thought it very good. So another place, the food changing for her. Right? Her relationship to food being really different. She suggests that no one has given her anything to eat previously. I had nothing to eat for a week. And then finally they gave me some of this trash and I couldn't keep it down. But finally now, 3 weeks in, I'm hungry enough to eat and be good. We find out on the very first day, someone had given her 6-year-old some bread, some cake. Right? That she had not fed the child or eaten herself. Right? But had just put away. She calls it her pocket. Her pocket's not like I have pockets in my pants. But almost kind of like a small satchel, right? It's called her pocket. It's where she keeps her sewing stuff. When she's talking about, look, I was knitting, I was making some socks, I was sewing this. It's because of what she has in her pocket, right? It's her pocket that allows her in many ways to move around as much as she does. She does work for different people. She's able to trade some of the things that she makes, right? I'm going to hem this, I'll stitch this, I can crochet this, and I can trade it for food or whatever. We find out here that she has some food she didn't eat, right? That's gone bad, but she says at the 14th remove, right? She's left Lancaster here, right? She's eating the bread here, being like, oh, they didn't bake it right. That's why it's so hard. Marty's like, no, it's just been in your pocket this whole time. You've been crossing rivers. Remember? Right? It's like this moment, right? You have to pay attention to this narrative because it's a little slippery at times. Right? Trying to keep track of what she's talking about. This is where this feels to be disingenuous to a certain degree. Like, it made it sound like no one can give you anything to eat. Right? It sounds a lot like somebody tried to give your child food, carried her on their horse, right? Like buried her, I think respectfully, right? They didn't just abandon the child. Right? There is a kind of care, there is a kind of attention, there is a kind of humanity underneath this that I feel like it's easy to miss. That you really have to work against Rowlandson to kind of identify. She continues her conversations around affliction in scripture and the 15th remove, things that are really at the heart of this for Rowlandson, that she's really trying to, while she's on this experience, make sense of what this means for her spiritually, religiously, right? How can she find her way and make her way through it? Another nice food moment in the 18th remove. We took our packs and along we went, right? Then I went to another wigwam where there were two of the English children, right? So there's two captive English children there. The woman was boiling horse's feet. Then she cut off a little piece and gave one of the English children a piece also. She gave me one and gave a piece to the English child also. Being very hungry, I quickly eaten up mine. But the child could not bite it. It was so tough and sinewy, right? It's a horse leg. But lay sucking, gnawing, chewing, and slavering on it, the mouth and hand. Then I took it of the child and eat it myself, and savory it was to my taste. Then I may say, as Job 6:7, Job 6:7, the things that my soul refused to touch are as my sorrowful meat. Thus the Lord made that pleasant refreshing, which another time would have been an abomination. Then I went to my mistress's wigwam, and they told me I disgraced my master with begging, and if I did so any more, they would knock me on the head. I told them they as good as knock me on the head as starve me to death. It takes food from a kid. You try and shoot it. Mouth it. Snatch that horse leg from a kid. Not a native kid, an English kid. It's like a big change, right? She's real hungry. That's real clear, right? But it's important to see, right? This is the kind of behavior that she attributes to native peoples, savages, right? The beasts of the wilderness. And get yours. Snatch some horse leg from this kid. 19th remove, she talks to Philip again. My foot slipped. By mercy, O Lord, help me out. Going along, having indeed my life, the little spirit Philip, who was in the company, came up and took me by the hand, and said, 2 weeks more, and you shall be mistress again. I asked him if he spake true. He answered, yes, and quickly you shall come to your master, who have been gone from us for 3 weeks. After many weary steps, we came to Wachusett, where he was, and glad I was to see him. He asked me when I washed me. I told him not this month, and he fetched some water himself and bid me wash. He gave me the glass to see how I looked, and bid his wife give him something to eat. So she gave me a mess of beans and meat and a little ground nut cake. I was wonderfully revived with this favor showed me. He made them also be pitied of all those that carried them captive. It's on page 290 that we meet Mary for the first time. In any kind of real sense. Weetaboo is in a relationship with Quinnipian, who is the master here who she's referring to. Historically, we know that she kind of had her own army of men, at least 300, kind of at her command. So when we talk about mistress, it's not that she's like the mistress of the house, right? Like Weetaboo is a significant leader in this community, right? With real military strength, right? She's one of the reasons why they change directions at different times, right? There's kind of moments where they kind of slide up and down over here in different places. And it's worth thinking about and seeing this in a real way. James Printer gets mentioned on 291, right? The man who comes and does some of this negotiation, who also, as I said, is the person who later on sets this up. I don't know if that's the person in the box. Bear with us for a minute, please. mentions again on 292, very end of the 11th remove. If I went to their wigwam at any time, they would always give me something, and yet they were strangers that I never saw before. Another woman gave me a piece of fresh pork with a little salt with it, and lent me her pan to fry it in. And I cannot remember what a sweet and pleasant and delightful relish bit that had been to me this day. So little do we prize common mercies when we have them in full. This is one of the first true moments where I feel like she recognizes the kind of mercy. It's another moment where she acknowledges this place, right? I was with them for so long, and the deep loneliness and loss, no protectors, and nobody really ever tried to hurt me. No one would mess with me, right? Just didn't always have enough to eat. We also find out in a little bit, not yet, I don't think she's mentioned it yet, that most of the native food has been destroyed by the English colonists, right? It's a complicated relationship. Oh, they don't have enough food, I'm not getting enough food. Well, all their food's been destroyed. It's one of the reasons why this war is happening, right? Land encroachment, lack of food. It's a real part of it, right? So when I talk about these food things, it's not just interesting because it's meat. Oh, she ate a horse leg, that's crazy, right? But actually, it's really underneath it. There's a complicated relationship. There's still deep generosity here, right? The native peoples don't have as much stuff, right? This isn't Pocahontas coming and bringing a bounty to celebrate, right? That doesn't exist right now. No one has a bounty. The English have destroyed native bounty. We'll find that place soon.
So did they have to turn to their horses to eat? Was that how bad it was, or were they already eating horses?
No, this is I'm not positive. My understanding is the former, the first of what you said. This is desperation.
Okay.
This is what Powhatan's discourse of peace and war, right? We talked about. Don't you think I know it's better to lay at home with my family and to eat good food and have meat, right? Than to go to the woods and eat trash, right? To eat roots and nuts, right? And bits of animals that die in the cold, right? You think I don't know it's better to do that? But they know how to survive. She's gonna cut to this, right? I want to point 295. She interrupts her text. But before I go any further, I would like to leave to mention a few remarkable passages of providence, which I took special notice of my afflicted times, right? So providence, right? Moments of intervention from the divine, right? Moments where God's hand is at the wheel, so to speak. Of the fair opportunity lost in the long march a little after the fortnight when our English army was so numerous in pursuit of the enemy and so near to take several and destroy them, right? She's coming back to, she's talking about these places where she feels like the army is so close, they ought to be able to do something and they can't do it. I say then that our army should want provision and be forced to leave their pursuit and return homeward. The very next week the enemy came upon our town, like bears breath of their whelps. What shall I say? God seemed to leave his people to themselves and order all things for his unholy ends. Shall there be evil in the city and the Lord has not done it? They are not grieved for the affliction of Joseph, therefore they shall go captive. The first to go captive, it is the Lord's doing, and should be marvelous in our eyes. 2. I cannot but remember how the Indians derided the slowness and dullness of the English army. Right? They laughed at us. 3. Which I have also hinted at before, when the English army with new supplies were sent forth to pursue after the enemy, and they, understanding it, fled before them till they came to the river, where forthwith they went over safely, and the river should be impassable to the English. I can but admire to see the wonderful providence of God in preserving the heathen for further affliction to our poor country. They should go in great numbers over, but the English must stop. God had an overruling hand in all these things. Right? So first he's saying, the fact that the English army had to leave where they were set up our town for vulnerability. Right? The English ran out of supplies, they had to go. We got set up, that's God's hand. The dogs didn't bark, right? She mentioned that earlier, dogs didn't bark. Here, I can't forget how much they mocked us, how much they teased our slowness. She thinks about the river as a place of providence, right? 4, it was thought if their corn were cut down, they would starve and die with hunger, and all their corn that could be found was destroyed. And they driven from that little they had in store into the woods in the midst of winter. Right? This is the game plan the Romans going on. Right? If we get rid of their corn and we cut down all their supplies in the window of winter, they'll all starve. And yet, how to admiration did the Lord preserve them from his holy ends, and the destruction of many still amongst the English. Strangely did the Lord provide for them. that I did not see all the time I was among them one man, woman, or child die with hunger. Though many times they would eat that a hog or a dog would hardly touch, yet by that God strengthened them to be the scourge to his people. Right? For Rowlandson, the only explanation that makes sense is that God preserves native peoples in order to punish the wicked English. Does that make sense? They're a scourge of his people, right? That God has to preserve the scourge, keep the scourge alive, right? To remind English people that God's in control. Does that make sense? Right? He sees native peoples as a kind of force of punishment and of judgment, right? God's deliverance and that is merciful. And so the idea here is that she's trying to understand why God is letting them cross the river. Why is God not letting them starve? Like, why are they living? How are they surviving? Even though we got rid of all their corn and all their supplies in the middle of winter. Like, why is this happening? They're supposed to die, and they didn't. So her explanation is that God is preserving them, right? Because he has some ends for them that have something to do with this. I hope you can see how centric it is, right? How self-centered it is. That all of this only makes sense, right, as it relates back to her in the English. This is what Brooks is talking about, right? When the idea of what is foreign and what is native, right? Native in this different sense of what is included in this place, right? 5. Another thing that I would observe is the strange providence of God in turning things about when the enemy was at the highest. Right? So strange providence of God. Another mode of this. So now things begin to turn. Right? Okay. Another place of narrative introduction, right, as it relates to authorship. Right? 297. Oh, the wonderful power of God near the top that I have seen, the experience that I've had. I have been in the midst of those roaring lions and savage bears, and neither feared God nor man nor the devil by night and day, alone in company, sleeping all sorts together, and yet not one of them ever offered me the least abuse of unchastity to me, in word or action. Right? This is her saying, no one tried to sexually assault me, no one insinuated it otherwise, right? No one offered me the least abuse of unchastity to me, in word or action. Right? She's like sleeping with strangers on the ground as they're moving along. This is her point. I've been in the wilderness. No one has messed with me. No one has said anything. She's very aware of herself, particularly as a vulnerable woman. Right? But she has no one has tried to do anything physically to her. Though some are ready to say, I speak it for my own credit, but I speak it in the presence of God and his glory. Right? She's defending herself to her readership. Right? Who would say, no, some stuff happened to you in the woods, you're just not talking about it. Right? These things happen. The men must have done this to you, and you're not talking about it because you don't want your reputation to be ruined. Right? Just make it really clear. Nobody did anything to you. Nobody said this. Though some are ready to say, I speak it for my own credit, but I speak it in the presence of God, who has glory. God's power is as great now and as sufficient to save as when he preserved Daniel in the lion's den. Defend yourself. Moment of leadership. Speaking about her child towards the end of this, 298. That which was dead lay heavier upon my spirit than those which were alive and amongst the heathen. Like a third of the way down. Right? She's thinking about her children that are still in captivity. That which was dead lay heavier on my spirit than those that were alive and amongst the heathen. Thinking how it suffered with its wounds, and I was no way able to relieve it, and how it was buried by the heathen in the wilderness among all Christians, where we hurried up and down in our thoughts. Sometimes we should hear a report that they were gone this way, and sometimes that they were come in this place or that. We kept inquiring and listening to hear concerning them, but no certain news as yet. She says on 300, after her deliverance, once it's over, I can remember the time when I used to sleep quietly without workings in my thoughts. Whole nights together, but now it is other ways with me. When all are fast about me, and no eye open but his who ever waketh, my thoughts are upon things past, upon the awful dispensation of the Lord towards us, upon his wonderful power and might, in carrying us through so many difficulties, and returning us in safety and suffering none to hurt us. She says, the last paragraph, before I knew what affliction meant, I was ready sometimes to wish for it. When I lived in prosperity, having the comforts of the world about me, my relations by me, my heart cheerful and taking little care of anything, and yet seeing many whom I preferred before me, under many trials and afflictions and sickness, weakness, poverty, losses, crosses, and cares of the world, I should be sometimes jealous, lest I should have my portion in this life. And the scripture would come to my mind, for whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. But now I see the Lord hath had his time to scourge and chasten me. The portion of some is to have their affliction by drops, now one drop, then another. But the dregs of the cup, the wine of astonishment, like a sweeping rain that leveleth no food, that leaveth no food, did the Lord prepare to be my portion. Right? Some people get their trials, their scourges, in little drops across their life. It's like, I got the whole glass, I got the whole cup all at once. Yet I see when God calls a person to anything and through never so many difficulties, that he is fully able to carry them through and make them see, and say they have been gainers thereby. And I hope I can say in some measure as David did, it's good for me that I've been afflicted. The Lord has showed me the vanity of these outward things, that they are the vanity of vanities, and vexation of spirit, that they are but a shadow, a blast, a trouble, things of no countenance. We must rely on God himself, and our whole dependence be upon him. The trouble from smaller matters begins to arise in me. I have something at hand to check myself with, and say, why am I troubled? It was but the other day that if I had had the world, I would have given it for my freedom, to have been a servant to a Christian. I have learned to look beyond present and smaller troubles, and to be quieted under them. As Moses said, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Turn back a couple pages to 98, when she thinks about her daughter's death. As a place not unlike Anne Bradstreet, where her grief rises up. Right? She's been delivered, cut through the trial, right? She makes it through. She drinks the bitter cup, right? And feels chastened, right? Humbled by the experience. She has some spiritual growth we kind of see here at the end. Recognizing the death of the child was a part of this process. Here she is looking back at that, right? Some scholars read this as a moment. She talks about like Lot turning back, right? Lot's wife turning back. If you look at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. That which was dead lay heavier upon my spirit than that which were alive and amongst the heathen, right? Thinking how it suffered with its wounds, right? She's going over this, thinking about the death of this child, right? In the moment of deliverance, out of the wilderness, her thoughts trail back, right? The child was buried in the hills. Scholars have read this as a place that like echoes Anne Bradstreet in the sense of where grief, particularly a mother's grief, right, is in excess of what's allowable within the Puritan kind of confines, right? This is a dangerous kind of move as it relates to providence. This is what God ordered. God set this thing in motion. This was my cross to carry, right? To say back, like my heart is like heavy thinking about this child, right? It's a place of vulnerability. It's a place of honesty. But it's a place where it kind of scripts this line of what's allowable in terms of grief, right? In terms of acceptance of God's kind of providence. She said she's not sleeping well anymore. I remember a time when I used to sleep quietly, right? She's not healed all the way. We have 1682, 1776, right? 6 years later, still really fresh for her, right? She's still dealing with it clearly at a like nighttime level. What questions do you have for me in the last couple minutes? I think I've covered just about everything that I wanted to, if not with the kind of depth that I wanted to.
Is there a specific reason that she refers to her child it, or is that just kind of like separating herself from the situation?
It's a really great question, and one that I think like I think your instinct is right here, right? That it feels really cold, and that this may be how it worked. Like she may really think about like the kind of eternal spirit of the child being gone, and she's thinking about the body. I don't know. It does read as like cold, right? It reads as callous. In my reading of early American literature, it's not that it's like more common, right? Like if you read Anne Bradstreet, it's not an it, right? Sometimes it's a she, it's a they, it's a them. So yeah, I think it's just her working on it. Other things, other questions, please?
Whenever she was like saying negotiated for release, how were they able to do that for certain people? Right? better than others?
A lot of it is who your family is, and the kind of arrangements of certain towns, right? Philip is speaking to her, right? Philip's in charge of this whole thing, right? Like, he seems to have some sense. She is actually controlled, right, held by a leading family among the native peoples, right? It's not just like she's being taken as a servant, right, to work, right? But she's being kind of protected by higher up officials. And so they would come into town, right, and be able to say, like, here's who we have in this place of exchange, right? So as you can see, they come back to, right, the 18th remove is here, the 19th remove is here, the 20th remove is here, right? Like, we're in this place, and so words have come around, like, folks are coming in, there's going to be an exchange at this place in time, right? Someone like James Printer runs as an intermediary between them, right? To come from the English who are like, families looking for this, they're willing to pay X, Y, and Z, they want this much money, like, is able to say the demands for prisoners from these folks are X, Y, and Z. They carry that message to the towns, they carry that message out to other places, right? So the families can get noticed that yes, she's alive, yes, she's going to be over here, and this is what they want for her. Does that make sense? It's a complicated network of exchange, but there are networks of communication that exist, not just among native peoples, right, but also among the English. And so you see through someone like James Printer a human network emerge, right, of a network of communication and of really complicated political negotiation and complicated wartime negotiation to make this happen. It's a great question. Other questions? Okay, I know that was a lot. There's a reason why I usually break this into 2 lectures. It's a whole lot. That's a lot to cover in that time. I'm sorry for that, but it seems better to me than trying to get behind and compress some other stuff. It's easy to combine at least one thing in one day instead of trying to combine 2 other things. So I appreciate your patience with something that feels a little duller because I had to lecture the whole thing. Enjoy the Hawthorne. It's in the Blue Book, right? Young, Goodman, Brown. Fiction, pay attention to the way Hawthorne sets this up. How do you know it's a dream? How do you not know it's a dream? Who is this shadowy man? How do you know? You guys got a conversation in the woods with somebody. Pay attention to how that works. And why we shouldn't go in the wilderness with strangers. Never a good idea.